Hey, today I'm talking about the Never-Ending Story Trilogy. Yep, I'm really excited. But just to give a little background on me before we get into it, I have not read the book, but I am very interested in reading the book now. And then second thing is, I hadn't seen the second or third one before, but I have seen the first one before. It's been about 15 years back in high school Spanish class, so I actually watched it in Spanish and not English. And I didn't remember a lot about it. I mostly remembered the dying and then someone shouting, "De nada! De nada!" Which, if I remember correctly, means the nothing, the nothing. So yeah, so let's just jump right into it, I guess. First up is Part 1. This one came out in 1984 and it's the big classic. It's the one everyone knows. If you're somehow unfamiliar, the basic premise is there is this little boy, Bastian, whose mom recently passed away and he's dealing with the grief of that, but his dad is very unsupportive. And then after some shenanigans, he finds this interesting book called The Never-Ending Story and he starts to read it and he gets really into it. Bastian is the framing device basically and also serves as the big metaphor. And then like the plot of the actual storybook is there is this fantasy world called Fantasia and there is this nothing that's destroying the world. It's literally nothing is consuming the world. Okay, I love this movie. It's great. The metaphor is amazing. Okay, so the villain is literally nothing, but the movie also explains that it's the lack of hope. This movie is all about Bastian's grief consuming him, and so the nothing is that grief consuming him. He needs to realize that like he needs hope in his life in order to continue on to get to live his own adventure. And I'm like, that's great. That's great. I love that. And then on top of that, the movie also further explains that it's not just about, the child's loss of hope. It's also about how those in power in the world want to instill a sense of hopelessness within us because then we are better able to control and manipulate. And I'm just like, this movie! I love this, I love this, I love this. And then on top of that, the creature designs are incredible. Every place they go is different and weird and strange. And like I'm currently working on some other like fantasy thing for funsies. And this movie is so inspiring for that because there's just so many cool fantasy ideas in this world. Like I love the place where the died. That's so interesting. This movie isn't without its faults though. My big complaint would be how incredibly aimless it feels because like they kind of explain it even where like Atreyu is sent off to go figure out what's causing the nothing, what's hurting the childlike empress. He needs to go find a cure and stuff. And they were like, he doesn't know where to go, so he just kind of wandered around for a week. And I'm like, yeah, that's what this movie's doing right now. It's just kind of like stuff is just happening. Like it's not like cause and effect. It's just like, and then. And it's like, come on guys, get some direction. Don't just meander about. So that was really frustrating. And then I also hated like the scene where Falcor shows up. Like I get it, but I also don't like it because he just so happens to show up just exactly when Atreyu is in danger and he like swoops in to save him. And I'm like, well, that was lucky. He's a luck dragon. He showed up just in the nick of time. That sure was lucky because he's a luck dragon and they're lucky. That's the thing. And I'm like, no, that's stupid. What are you doing? Don't do that. Like I get it. It makes sense. But it's also poor writing. But back to praising this movie, I loved their sense of scale, that like no two creatures were really ever the same size. Like the giant rock guy was freaking incredibly giant. And then there was like those little gnome people, they were just so tiny. And then like even like some of the people in like the party at the beginning were just like all different sizes and shapes and weird. And I loved all of that. That was so great. And then I loved too how that they actually like had real stakes in this movie, that the scene where the died. I thought that was like near the end of the movie. No, that's really close to the beginning. They established early on that people die in this. And then like when the nothing takes over stuff, those things are legit dead. They are just gone. And that's incredible. It's so good. It's such a good, well-told, interesting story. There are a couple of not great special effects shots, and there's a lot of very, very 80s music that just like was difficult to get through, but it was definitely worth it to get through it because the story is incredible. I love this movie. It's so freaking good. I definitely recommend this one. You do have to watch it with the lens of this is a kid's movie and this is an 80s movie, but as long as you can get over those hurdles, it's definitely worth the experience because it's great. I love this movie. It's so good. Next up is Part 2, The Next Chapter. This movie came out 6 years later in 1990, and so it essentially recast every single person in the movie, which definitely counts against it. Like, if they were gonna make a sequel, they should have done it right away. But like, looking past that, I still enjoyed this movie a good solid amount. So this is based off the second half of the book, but it kind of messes some things up. For instance, it starts off with he's back in the real world, which it's confusing, like what happened between the end of the first movie and the beginning of this movie, because it just seems like they're very different things. He really should have just stayed in Fantasia between the two movies and had like no time pass. Since I'm already complaining, I'm going to do my other big complaint, and that is they make a big deal about how Bastian doesn't have any confidence anymore. He lacks all his confidence. And I'm like, that's shit. He is full of so much confidence throughout this entire movie. Like, he is just to the brim with confidence, save for 2 scenes. And those 2 scenes being the first scene where he can't jump off the diving board, and they establish that he doesn't have any confidence, which is really weird because like he definitely had confidence before, but they do explain it because the weird bird guy stole his confidence, but he didn't really because he has confidence throughout the entire movie. Anyway, the second time that he doesn't have confidence is at the end of the movie where they're trying to resolve the arc of he doesn't have any confidence by him suddenly having confidence. And it's like, you didn't really have an arc because he literally had confidence the entire movie, so this makes no sense. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna explain the premise now and then start talking about all the things I crazy love about this movie. So the premise with this movie is that Bastian goes back to Fantasia, NeverEnding story, and he now has the ability to make wishes, which he did get at the end of the first one. He got it so he could like rebuild Fantasia. And so I did read like the Wikipedia of what happened in the book, and kind of in the book it's more so like after he kind of rebuilds everything, he just stays in the world and starts just using all of his wishes to go on adventures. In the movie, it's sort of like that, but not exactly the same. But what's so interesting is that the writer made a really interesting story choice because they gave the main character the solution to any problem ever. He literally wish away any issue that ever comes up, just like that. So simple. And it's like, well, how do you tell a story when you can just wish away anything? You shouldn't be able to. But Bastian loves adventures. He's constantly reading. And so Bastian as a character doesn't just want to wish away any issue. He wants to go on adventures. He wants to explore the world. He wants to dive into the mysteries to figure out what is going on. He doesn't just want to cheat his way to the solution. He wants to go on the big grand adventure. He wants to do the thing. That's so interesting. That like he could just choose to skip to the end at any moment, but by his love of adventure, he doesn't want to do that. Now this movie does have a villain, unlike the first one, but the villain wants to take the unlimited wishes away from this child so they can, you know, do what they want to do with it. And so they've created this machine that steals Bastian's memories every single time he makes a wish. But he doesn't want to make any wishes because he wants to go on all these adventures. So their issue is they need to trick this kid into being selfish and making all of these silly wishes. And it's like, that's such an interesting dilemma to have. That's so cool. Because then once he loses all of his memories, then they can just take the thing from him. He doesn't know what it is. And like, that's so, it's so brilliant. That's such good writing. So even though there is a villain, the actual enemy is the emptiness. I kind of more saw it as like the hollowness of everything, because whereas the first movie was all about dealing with grief, this one is all about addiction. That Bastian has this whole huge fantasy world in which he can do anything he wants, and he has become obsessed with it. He doesn't want to leave. They do a great job of like explaining that in the movie. It's more so in the book, from what I can gather. He's using this world as an escape from dealing with his emotions fully and dealing with his unattentive father and fully processing the grief of his mother. And so like, yeah, this world is amazing and fantastic, but there's a hollowness to it because he essentially overstayed his welcome because he's become addicted to it. And that's so good. That's such good writing. That's so great. I love this metaphor. It's terrific. Again, the movie doesn't do a great job of explaining it, but it's there and it's awesome. I love it. I didn't put this movie in the really like category though. It got knocked down a bit for a handful of reasons. Obviously the recasting, I brought it down. The special effects were still good, not great. The whole thing about Bastian not having confidence but actually being confident the entire time wasn't great. And just kind of other bits and pieces of things. Honestly, I feel like if I rewatch it though, it might get bumped up because it was really solid. It didn't get great reviews at the time, which I'm a little surprised with how harsh people were. Because again, I enjoyed this movie a lot. If you liked the first one, I would say give this one a shot too. It's not as good as the first one, but it's still pretty dang solid. That's for sure. And lastly is Part 3, the one with Jack Black. Yep, that's right. Jack Black is in this movie, and he is the best part of this movie. This one's not good. So this one isn't actually based off of the book at all. This is from 1994, and the premise is that it's been a year since the last movie, even though it's been 4, and it's now suddenly hardcore the 90s, and Bastian's dad has remarried, and Bastian's not happy about it, and his stepsister isn't happy about it. Now he's going to a new school where the bullies aren't happy that Bastian exists. So what does Bastian do? He runs away to Fantasia, but unfortunately the bullies discover the book and they figure out that he's in the book, and they're like, we're gonna wreck everything. How do they wreck everything? By just saying that they're gonna wreck everything. That's it. They don't explain how these bullies are affecting the book, when in the 2 previous movies, the only way you could affect the book is just by talking at it, and they don't really do that. They just read the book. That's all they're doing, is reading the book, and that's wrecking everything. I guess because they're bad, but why would they wreck the book? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, from there, the now adult childlike Empress tells Bastian that he needs to leave Fantasia to go back to the real world to get the book back from the bullies. And then, when he goes back, some of the magical creatures from Fantasia come with him, but they don't end up in the same spot. They get spread across the world because reasons. So now Bastian has to go and find all of the fantastical creatures that came across with him. So in other words, most of this movie doesn't take place in the fantasy world of the movie, it takes place in the real world. Because that's what we all want in our fantasy movies, is to just be in the regular world. I hate this movie. This movie is so interesting because they make every wrong choice. I didn't actually finish this movie because I just got so bored / annoyed with it. The special effects look worse than ever. The premise makes absolutely no sense. What are you doing? I don't think there's a metaphor for anything. The villain of this movie is the Nasties, which is a group of bullies, which I don't get what that's all about. I mean, like, the arc that they're supposed to go on is learn to get along with your new family, stuff like that. But, like, your other 2 movies were about grief and addiction. And now your third one is love your stepsister, but not in like the porn way. This movie is dumb and bad. Jack Black is kind of fun. He narrates a lot, so that's nice. But yeah, I really hated what they did with the rock monsters because they just kind of turned them into just a giant joke. Which, I mean, they were a joke before, but it's like now they're in like a cartoon character. And like the sense of scale is completely gone. Because whereas before he just kind of was like outside as rocks as in a mountain range, he's now living in just like a regular house. So like it looks like a regular house but rocks. It's like Flintstones. Except he's a giant, so like where is this house? I guess it's in a mountain. A really, really big mountain? Sure. And he's wearing clothes and his wife is wearing clothes and his baby's wearing clothes and it's all weird. And then he has a motorcycle and then he sings a song. I think it's a tricycle. And then he sings a song which is dumb. He sings Born to Be Wild. But then like what's even more infuriating than the fact that he sings Born to Be Wild is he doesn't even sing the title of the song. The song cuts out right before he gets to Born to Be Wild. World? Like, it just stops right before there. And it's like, you're gonna do this song without doing the big thing that everyone wants to hear when they hear the song is that part, and they don't do it. What are you doing, movie? So yeah, so I didn't like this movie. I don't recommend it. Watch the other two, don't watch this one. Alrighty, now for today's rankings. First up, we got part 1, sitting at number 15 in the really like section. It's so good. And then not too terribly far behind is part 2, sitting at number 30 in the quite like section. Again, so good. And then bringing up the rear, rightfully so, is part 3, sitting at number 81 in the didn't like section. And this is out of a total of 81 old movies so far this year. So yes, that means that part 3 is my least favorite old movie so far this year. Rightfully so.